I'll look at Paul and you'll give me the nod.
Just me.
Yeah,
we're
we're live now, Chair.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economic Prosperity Subcommittee. My name's Councillor Janet Hunter and I'm the chair of this subcommittee. This meeting is being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel to enable members of the press and public to observe the meeting, and I welcome anybody who is watching. Before we move on to the agenda, I would like first to make it clear who's participating in the meeting and explain how we intend to conduct this meeting. In order to check who's in the meeting, I'd like everyone present to confirm their attendance at the meeting. In order to do this, I'll now call out the names of members of the committee, and after I call your name, could you please turn on your microphone and your camera and introduce yourself, just so we can be sure that you can be seen and heard. So we'll start with Councillor Ken Barry. Here. Councillor Naomi Craven. Councillor John Harrison.
Yes, here, Janet.
Thank you. Councillor Joe Kerwin.
Yeah, I'm here and present and correct.
Thank you. Good evening. Councillor Karen Lee. Councillor Martin Rankin. Councillor John Sterling. Councillor Matthew Thirlaway.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Joan Walker.
Good evening.
Aye. Councillor Francis Wheatman. And Councillor Matt Wilson.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. And also present online with us are the following officers, and I'll invite them to introduce themselves. So after I call your name, could you please turn on your microphone, camera, and introduce yourself, please? John Sparks.
Good evening, Chair. I'm John Sparks and I'm Head of Regeneration and Economic Development for the Council.
Good evening. Sean Collier.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Sean Collier. I'm the Senior Manager for Business and Enterprise.
Good evening. Mark Barrett.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Mark Barrett, Senior Manager for Employment and Skills.
Good evening. Paul Dowling.
Good evening, Chair. Nice to meet you. I'm a new starter working with John. I'm the new Service Manager for Strategic Regeneration and Transport. So good evening to you and to members of the subcommittee.
And you're very welcome. It's nice to meet you. Henry Kippen. No. And Michael Robson.
Evening, everyone. Michael Robson, Clerk to the committee.
Thank you. So everybody's been sent guidance
I'm not aware of any, no chair, nor of any substitute members. And if I could just add at that point, just to make you aware that Henry Kippen has now been able to join us. If you wish for Henry to introduce himself.
And happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we all know what those problems can be at times. So are there any declarations of interest? Members who have interest they want to declare in relation to items on the agenda? No? In that case, in that case, could we agree the minutes? Now, the minutes are of the meeting held on the 3rd of March 2020. For those of us who can remember that far back, can we agree them, please?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we move on to item 5. The report is on employment and skills, and we've received, well, hopefully most of us have received the agenda papers with the report that provides an update on the employment and skills data, policy announcements, progress and challenges resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've got some speakers tonight. Mark Barrett is going to present quite a lot of the report to us, but he's also going to be joined by Sean Collier at the end, who's going to talk about how the pandemic is affecting the local economy. I think it would be helpful to know whether you, Mark and Sean, would prefer to take questions and comments at the end of each section, or just take everything all together and then have questions and comments. Or do you want questions and comments as people have them throughout your presentations? How would you like to do it?
Chair, I think comments and questions at the end of the presentation, because I have got some slides to share and I won't be able to see hands up.
Okay, so if we wait until the end of your presentation, take your questions and comments, and then Sean will do his, and we'll go to questions and comments. And Henry, I don't know whether, I know you haven't got a presentation, but at the end of that, would you like to just make some comments, or do you just want to join in the discussion?
I'm happy to, Chair. I'm happy to do a bit of an update on the North of Tyne end of things after the presentation. So if you give the nod, I'll
that would be really helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So in that case, it's over to you, Mark.
Councillor Wilson has his hand raised, Chair.
Sorry, I couldn't see that. Matt.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify, are we going to have 2 consecutive presentations from 2 different people and then questions?
No, we're going to take Mark's presentation, questions and comments on that, and then Sean will do his questions and comments on that, and then I'll invite Henry Kippin to speak.
Brilliant. That's what I hoped you were going to say. Good. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I just check, Chair, that everybody can see the slides on the screen there?
Yes, you're Great. Visible and audible.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought, first of all, it would be quite useful just to give an update on a few actions that we identified at the last meeting on the 3rd of March 2020. And just to give you a bit of an update on those. I will cover some of these during the presentation as well. But one of the actions was just to share ward profiles in terms of employment data across North Tyneside. So I've included the link in there, and I know that the link was circulated after the meeting on the 3rd of March last year. There was also comments made and some useful suggestions around care academies, around skills academies for the care industry, and in particular the Red Car example was cited, and that's covered in this update as well. I'll give you a bit of an update on where we've got to with establishing a social care academy in North Tyneside. And then the final point was on the North of Tyne Good Work Pledge. And work has continued on the North of Tyne Good Work Pledge, and obviously Henry is here as well and be able to give us a bit of an update on that, but recently appointed a coordinator to take that work forward as part of the North of Tyne work as well. So I thought it would be useful just to cover a few of those points off.
Thank you.
As we've covered, the purpose of the update today is to cover some of the most recent employment and skills data, and I know there's been some more employment data released today, which has shown a sort of similar picture, to cover some of the key policy announcements that we've had over the last 12 months, which has obviously been an unprecedented time, but there are a couple of major policy announcements that have come out to discuss some of the progress and challenges in what has been a very different environment since March last year, opportunities that may arise from the current situation, and some of the priorities that we have in terms of recovery relating to employment and skills. So the first sort of major policy announcement came last July 2020, when the government announced a package of measures really looking at addressing rising levels of unemployment that happened from last April. And mainly this was an announcement of additional funding for some of the existing services that covered careers advice, training, in particular for young people, and some extra support within the Department for Work and Pensions around extra work coach capacity and job search support. And then there's a couple of sort of other major announcements there around the Kickstart scheme, which I'm sure everybody has heard of, and some apprenticeships incentives as well, which I'll cover in a bit more detail further on in the presentation. Second major policy announcement came on the 21st of January with the publishing of the Skills for Jobs white paper, which in particular covered further education changes. And the paper's split into sort of 5 key themes there. First one is around putting employers at the heart of post-16 skills. So that covers a central role around the development of local skills improvement plans, working with local providers, but also then led by accredited chambers of commerce. It covers using labour market information to inform that provision, and also has a priority around growing and improving the quality of apprenticeships and traineeships. The second element to that is around advancing higher technical skills, so in particular using the National Skills Fund and the Lifetime Skills Guarantee to increase the range and the scope of Level 3 plus provision. Also reforming Level 4 and Level 5 technical education and improving progression routes for learners who are going through that training provision. The third element is around the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, and in particular changes to lifelong loan entitlements that will come in 2025. And then the next element is around making providers more responsive. So this is really covering around reforms to further education funding, looking at simplification and certainty for providers, but also with more accountability through strengthened governance of colleges. Final element is around supporting outstanding teaching and learning, and this is really around a national recruitment campaign and improved professional development for teachers working in the further education sector. So they're the sort of 2 main policy announcements that have sort of driven the approach over the last 12 months or so. Obviously, a key priority for us in terms of recovery from the COVID pandemic is supporting opportunities for young people. So it's a key strategic priority which runs through all of our strategies. And this is really around further improving the careers education, information, advice and guidance, how we support schools to embed that careers education into their curriculum, how we're helping schools to help them achieve the Gatsby career benchmarks and quality and career standards, and really an aim to maximise participation of young people in apprenticeships, employment with training and further education, and look to reduce the levels of young people not in education, employment and training. That's been sort of a main priority over the last 12 months. So ensuring progression routes are in place has been really important through developing new funding programmes when they are needed, but also then looking at a wider focus on the impacts of COVID-19 and what that will have on young people going forward. This slide just covers those rates of young people not in education, employment and training, so 16 to 17 year olds, the focus here in North Tyneside, and it compares some of the data between December 2019 and December 2020. And what you can see there is what we've really done has been a focus on trying to minimise that increase as much as possible. And what we haven't seen is a huge rise in the levels of young people aged 16 to 17. That's the same in England, across the northeast and in North Tyneside. But what you can see there is actually we compare favourably. We always have done, but we compare favourably when we look at those averages across England and the northeast region. In terms of our priority was sort of the response during 2020. We made some decisions immediately after the sort of the first lockdown in March 2020 that our priority was about securing destinations for young people who would be leaving school in July. So looking at year 11 and year 13 students in particular, making sure that they had recorded destinations, and then after that, then securing offers of learning in place early. So for the year 11 students, we were looking at just over 2,000 young people who will be leaving school in July 2020. And it was a key priority to make sure that they were securing destinations for the September after they left year 11 at school. We obviously took into account the impact of less apprenticeships and employment opportunities, because we were expecting those to be limited from September. And we also target and supported those young people who are classed as vulnerable, so in particular those that were more at risk of NEET because of their own circumstances, care leavers, and young people with special educational needs as well. Education has obviously been severely disrupted, and this is also the case for post-16 providers. There's been a lot of disruption over the last 12 months, and we've continued with the challenges of delivering provision safely, responding to lots of new guidance as it's come out, and facing extreme funding pressures as well. So that's been an added pressure on those providers. But there's also some positives in there in terms of how we've utilised new ways of working, virtual careers advice, jobs fairs, virtual jobs fairs that we've undertaken. There's been examples of virtual work experience, and in particular then blended learning approaches that all providers have adopted over the last 12 months. And there'll be some good practice that we'll see coming out of that going forward in the future. Just a couple of examples from North Tyne side there around the best practice. National Apprenticeship Week each year is a key focus across the borough, and we bring partners together always to deliver a range of events that happen in schools, amongst providers, getting employers involved in the week. Activities across the week that then culminate in our Get Up and Go event, which we normally hold, as everybody will know, within Cobalt, within the offices there. Normally have around 750 young people and parents that attend, and we always do that on a Saturday morning. So this year we decided, obviously we're going to have to do it virtually. It's going to have to be an online event. We're going to have to do it differently, but we were keen to still hold the event and still to do it on the Saturday morning if we could. So we did an online event. We had 25 employers signed up on the 13th of February, ran it for 2 hours, where employers were posting videos, tours of their premises, talked through what their apprenticeship offer was, what the benefits of apprenticeships are, and then also some sort of online chat rooms as well, where young people could go in and ask questions of those employers around their offer as well. The event was absolutely brilliant, and we saw, looking at the online chat, we saw a lot of participation of young people, a lot of participation of parents, a lot of really good intelligent questions being asked. And actually, as we find with the normal event, we have actually young people signing up for apprenticeships on the day, and we saw lots of young people then going in and submitting applications for apprenticeship opportunities. Just had some figures through, and actually on the day we had 1,100 viewers on the event itself on the Saturday morning, and since we've had another 900 on-demand viewings of that as well. So from a usual participation where we have 750 people coming through the doors, we've actually almost been able to triple that with the virtual event. So going forward, we can see a mix of approaches would be really successful in future years around that. What we also have is another event which will be held on the 4th of March, which is part of National Careers Week. Again, we always hold a range of events and activities that happen across National Careers Week. And the North Tyneside Learning Trust, this time is holding a Careers Live event, working with the schools that are part of the trust as well. And there'll be other activities that are happening as well. So we've been working closely with them around National Apprenticeship Week, but also this event as well. Just in terms of of apprenticeships, I know I've covered in previous updates to the subcommittee around a decline in apprenticeship starts since some of the reforms were introduced in 2017, and this slide just demonstrates that decline in those starts, but also then a move to sort of high-level apprenticeships with more starts for over 25-year-olds as well. Has been a trend that we've actually talked about before. The move from apprenticeship frameworks to standards has inevitably had an impact on this as well as we move to try and improve the quality of apprenticeships, and that's had an impact on the numbers of level 2 apprenticeships available, which we see impacting on the numbers of young people that are participating. And in particular, the business administration framework that previously existed was always a good route for young people to access apprenticeships, and providers are sort of looking at alternatives to that at the moment. We don't have the 2020-21 data as yet, but due to obviously the current situation, I am expecting that we'll see a further decline in starts across apprenticeships. But alongside that, we're also seeing some positives there. We are hearing from employers that they're reporting to continue recruitment of apprentices. They're obviously looking at recovery in terms of using apprenticeships as well. In particular, our own training, where we do have some robust data on. We currently have 55 apprentices on programme, and we've managed to retain 54 of those apprentices undertaking learning. Obviously, it's a challenge around undertaking learning with apprentices, so in the main it's having to be online for the last 12 months, but we've only experienced one redundancy of losing one apprentice from our programmes. And the council is also then proceeding with its own apprenticeship recruitment and intake for 2021 as well. So there are some positives there in terms of the recruitment of apprentices. The next slide covers furlough data, so in particular the coronavirus job retention scheme and some of the actual take-up across North Tyneside. And the take-up represents, it's similar to the sort of national and the regional trend in terms of take-up on the furlough scheme. So we saw that rise early on in the pandemic up to July 2020, and as the economy reopened over the summer of 2020, that actually the furlough scheme then, numbers on furlough actually then declined, and we've seen a recent uptake in the scheme as well in November and December 2020. Don't have the January data as yet, but would expect to be similar as well. And obviously we're looking at this, that reflects the patterns of restrictions, but obviously we're looking at this quite closely in terms of the end of the furlough scheme and what the impact will be on that. This is also then reflected in the employment and unemployment data. So this slide covers the claimant count by age group. So this is people who are unemployed and actually looking for work. And you can see there the impact of the furlough scheme, where we had that very early significant rise in unemployment between March and May 2020. And then we've seen that sort of plateau since, and we do think that's the effect of the furlough scheme plateauing at that point. And then obviously, as I said, as the furlough scheme comes to an end, what the impact will be across the course of 2021 on that. But we do expect a further rise in unemployment across this year. In terms of our response to this, I mentioned the Department for Work and Pension has employed extra work coaches and put in additional funding to support with that rise in unemployment. Employability projects, which in the main are European social funded at the moment, have managed to maintain delivery, although obviously that has had to be done virtually in the main. And our own response, which is outlined on this slide, is we implemented a back to work service back in April 2020 with some funding from the Combined Authority, which was COVID recovery funding. So we have access to 250,000 of that. The service launched in July 2020 with 4 employment advisors. And the way the service works is it's a triage model. Where any businesses that are being affected by the pandemic, in particular around employment, can contact us for advice and guidance. So this can be around recruitment, redundancies, or retraining of employees. And we also then deal with newly unemployed residents contacting us as well. In the main, through the triage model, if we can deal with the inquiries quickly, then we will do so. And obviously, if then it needs signposting to additional, more intensive support, then we'll do that either by signposting unemployed residents through to employability projects for support, or through businesses through to additional finance support if that's needed as well. Key aspect of the scheme is promoting good work and engaging with the North of Tyne Good Work pledge ethos and the principles around that. And what we found is actually performance on this, the engagement with this project has been really successful. There's numerous examples of individuals and businesses that have been supported through the project. One example is we supported around recruitment for the NHS COVID Hub testing facility in Gateshead, and helped with some pre-employment training and advice and guidance, so we could support residents to be access those opportunities, and we surpassed some of the targets around that this scheme as well. The scheme's also been extended up till September 2021, and that's directly in response to the extension of the furlough scheme, so we can continue the support as long as it's needed. Another example that I mentioned earlier is the Kickstart scheme. So again, this was part of the announcements back in July 2020. 6-month job placements for 16 to 24-year-olds who are on universal credit. The scheme covers 100% of salary costs for an employer at the national minimum wage for 25 hours per week. Also covers the additional costs of national insurance and superannuation as well. The way the scheme was set up was that any employer who could provide 30 placements could apply direct to the Department for Work and Pensions to create those placements, but that requirement's just recently been changed, so any employer offering any opportunities can apply direct. But in response to that threshold of 30 placements, we agreed with the Combined Authority that they would act as an employer gateway to be able to submit applications to employers on their behalf to create placements, and the 3 local authorities would then support with the business engagement and the promotion of the scheme. And then you can see I've got some data there around the numbers of placements, expressions of interest we've had from employers on placements so far, and that's up till the 1st of February, so there's 211 placements that are going through the process at the moment, and 129 of those in North Tyneside. So we've had a really good response from businesses in North Tyneside, and that's across a range of sectors and occupations that are being covered as well, which I think are covered in a bit more detail in the written report as well. In terms of vacancies, follows a similar trend to levels of unemployment that we did see an initial decline in March, July 2020, but since we've seen a recovery in the numbers of vacancies as the economy opened up over the summer. And in particular there from the slide you can see that vacancies within the health and social care sector are the strongest there, and in particular care workers and home carers, we've seen a doubling of the numbers of vacancies when we compare the 2019 data and the 2020 data. That obviously gives us a challenge in terms of supporting those employers to try and fill those vacancies in the current situation, and obviously we're doing that through our own Back to Work service, but working with partners as well, such as the Department of Work and Pensions, to do that. The Combined Authority's also got projects that are helping with this as well. So there is a project called the Return to Work project, which supports carers back into employment. And that's been a focus as well on supporting to help some of these harder to fill vacancies and higher numbers of vacancies as well. In terms of adult learning skills, I think we covered in the last presentation in March 2020 around the devolution of adult education budget to the Combined Authority, which commenced on the 1st of August 2020. That gives us a real opportunity to be flexible and respond to the current economic situation, with a focus on funding beyond the low skilled, the unemployed and the disadvantaged. But also providing some progression routes as well into key sectors and occupations as well. So the funding for providers, including our own service, sees a wide range of provision being funded to increase the amount of vocational training provision. But that's obviously been severely impacted during COVID-19 with the initial closure of venues, enrolments and participation dramatically reduced, and then obviously a response around remote blended learning being introduced, distance learning courses and COVID secure venues to support vulnerable learners. Chair, can I just check I'm online there, because I heard...
Yes, you are.
I am. Good. I heard a ping and I wasn't sure if it was me going offline or somebody else. That's fine. Just the last couple of examples of that were around the adult education budget and specific projects in North Tyneside that we've introduced. One is a digital outreach project where we've received £150,000 worth of funding from the Combined Authority per annum. This is supporting residents in North Tyneside with basic digital skills who may be at risk of digital exclusion. So it's particularly relevant, obviously at the moment, in terms of being able to support residents in accessing handheld devices, use of digital access to services, e-safety, and homeschooling as well. So we've been engaging with the voluntary community sector around setting up a network of digital champions in the local community around that. And we've also been delivering a number of online sessions around staying connected. So that's the use of video calls, accessing online services such as GP surgeries, shopping, digital banking, and also then connection through social media to be able to stay connected and safe. So the take up on this project has been really successful. It's obviously difficult to deliver when you're sort of doing a digital exclusion project and people don't have access to digital and you're trying to do it virtually. But we found ways around that and it's been really successful. And then the final example is some funding we received from the Combined Authority. So this builds on the recommendation last March around Social Care Academy and something that we'd already identified as being a particular need around progression routes into social care. So we are running a 6-month pilot of a Social Care Academy, which commenced in January 2021. We've co-designed the training scheme with social care employers, including our own adult social care service and a number of local employers as well. Covers 6 weeks pre-employment training with some practical learning and work experience, and then guaranteed interviews with employers that we're currently working with, as well as some additional training certification in that as well. Obviously, it's a pilot at the moment. The numbers were limited on our first intake, but we're looking to run this across the course of this year. And we also have a plan to build this into our annual training offer as well, if there's a good take-up and it's successful as well. What we'll also be doing is we'll be delivering this alongside some of our other academy offers, which includes a catering academy, retail, and also digital skills academies as well. So we're really excited about how we can build that offer to work with local employers around actually their particular training and vocational skills needs. That's the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions on that.
Thank you very much, Mark. Oh, I'm echoing. Can anybody else hear me speaking twice? No. Right. Okay, thank you very much, Mark. That was really helpful and useful. It's a long time since we've heard from you, and so many changes have happened. It's really good to be brought up to date with all the exciting things that we are involved in across the borough, with funding from both the government and from the North of Tyne. So I've got Matt who would like to speak. Matt Wilson.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, predictably, I always like to ask questions. I think you all know me by now. Mark, thank you for a great presentation and for an incredibly detailed and thorough report. The problem with giving such a long report is it generates lots of questions because there's so much in it. So I'm going to try and be brief, but I have got 3 or 4 questions.
That's fine.
So I guess the first one is probably it links a point on last year's report, which you helpfully, has also been included, and close to where you landed on the social care. So it's this essentially this point about the high number of vacancies for care workers, and your report to us, a year ago, essentially made a correlation between the high number of vacancies and, I quote here, the level of pay and rewards offered. Basically, they get paid now, which is why there's so many vacancies. It's a poorly esteemed and poorly paid profession. And it's worrying that the number of vacancies have doubled again in another year, when we've learned this year just how much we depend on these wonderful people to care for many of our most vulnerable residents. I was listening to Cabinet last night. This cropped up at Cabinet as well, about the essentially the poor rates of pay, minimum wage jobs for care workers. And, we think a lot about the ambition that we have in North Tyneside. And I hesitate to say this sort of publicly, but when I was watching Cabinet, there was kind of a collective shrug about this, that, well, what can we do? So many of these care homes are run by private providers, etc. What can we do? And I guess that's my question is, do we have to just, put up with the situation? Are there any levers we can pull? Is there anything that we can do? Do we know of any other authorities nearby or anywhere in the country who've managed to sort of somehow grind out a better deal for their care workers? So I guess that's my first and biggest question, and I'll leave that. You can perhaps come to that one before we get into some other stuff.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Easy
yes.
one for you, Mark.
Yeah, a nice easy one for me to kick off with.
Important one though, it's a really important one.
It is very important, and I think the actual filling vacancies is one thing, but you're absolutely right. The quality of that work is equally important. Now, I don't know whether there'll be any sort of national policy announcements over the next 12 months that will look to address that, because obviously it does get a lot of press coverage as well around that quality of that work. I guess from our own point of view, and what we've got control of is, first of all, our engagement with employers and who we are working with, and obviously we are trying to promote the quality of work as well. And the Good Work Pledge, the North of Tyne Good Work Pledge, has a key role in this, in terms of actually raising the bar around the quality of employment and which sectors in particular that we should be targeting around that. And we have had a number of discussions. Obviously things have been held up a little bit over the last 12 months around employers being able to be focused on it, applying for accreditation around that. But we do need to do some work around actually the social care sector and see how we can get some exemplars in there, some good practice, some good examples of employers being able to deal with the levels of funding that they have, but still being able to offer quality of work and the quality of opportunities that are there. And I think if we can get some examples of that and be able to promote them as part of the scheme, that will help us then to have those discussions with those providers out there around actually there are ways to do this. And in particular around the Good Work Pledge, we've been very keen not just to base it on it's just about pay, or it's just about actually those things that the bigger employers may be able to address quite quickly. Actually, it's about how small employers, voluntary community sector employers, can actually be able to sign up to the scheme without it being too bureaucratic, too complex for them. How can they demonstrate that actually they're providing good work and quality of work? And that can be around actually their engagement with their employees. It can be around actually flexible benefits they may provide to employees that actually don't cost a huge amount of money. Very simple to do, but actually demonstrate that quality of work. So I guess I haven't got the answer fully, but I think that's a way of us being able to try and address it as best we can.
Thanks, Mark. Matt?
Do you mind if I continue, Chair, with a couple more questions?
You've got 2 or 3 more. If you ask yours, then I'll move on to Matthew, who's also indicated.
Right. Well, I guess the next one is perhaps something you might need to go away and get back to us on, Mark. I don't imagine you'll be able to tell us this off the top of your head. But you've presented some fantastic detail on the policy announcements. Lots of numbers, millions and millions of pounds here, there and everywhere. I guess my big question on that is it would be useful to know which of these schemes that are listed here in these policy announcements are going to affect us here in North Tyneside? You know, how much of this money is going to trickle down into our area? What do we expect there? So that was my second question, and I do appreciate that's a detailed question that you probably have to go away and perhaps come back to us on. You spoke to us about that trend in the apprenticeships and the fact that it still tends downwards. The impression that I got from you on that was that essentially that's not due to factors in North Tyneside that are causing the downward trend, but actually the government have been monkeying around with apprenticeships, and therefore they've become less attractive to both employers and potentially to the apprentices themselves. But well done on the engagement with the virtual event for Apprentice Week. I was really pleased to hear that we'd got so many young people interested in that, even though you weren't able to offer the live event. Congratulations as well on the Kickstart scheme and the fact that of those 200 and odd young people who are participating in Kickstart, such a big percentage of them are from North Tyneside. That's fantastic as well. I did wonder of the sectors that were included in Kickstart. I didn't see the sort of NHS involved in there. So are there no ways of getting sort of work placements? This is a question for you directly now. Is there any way of getting work placements in the NHS for through the Kickstart scheme? Because obviously there's a big employer in the area.
Yeah, just to respond on two of those, I think yes, the apprenticeship is a national impact, but it's how we mitigate that, isn't it, and how we adapt to those changes to try and increase numbers across North Tyneside. So that's a constant challenge for us to do. And on the Kickstart placements, yeah, we are looking at which sectors have already engaged and where there are gaps. And if there is a gap, obviously with the NHS, we've got the relevant contacts, the local contacts, to engage with those. That's certainly something we'll take forward.
Yeah, brilliant. I had one more, and that was on the digital outreach project. That sounds great. I think I heard you mention that you've got the voluntary sector involved as well. I just want to make sure this is joined up with, because I know FODA have got a digital inclusion project that I think they've got EE involved in as well. And so is that all joined up, Mark?
Absolutely, yeah. We are having weekly conversations with FODA. The way it's going to work with the digital champions working in the community is we're going to provide that sort of pre-training for the digital champions. They'll then be engaged with FODA to actually be able to go out in the community and work with people. So yeah, certainly joined up with the voluntary community sector and FODA in particular.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, for your questions and comments. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. I should probably start by declaring that I work for Parkside Care, which is a social care provider, because I'm going to speak on the issue of staff vacancies for social care, because it's not necessarily the issue of vacancies. It's actually, in our experiences, actually the turnover of staff is huge. It is ridiculously huge, the turnover of staff. I don't think any other business actually deals with such a turnover of staff coming in and out. So I imagine that's why the vacancy level is so high for that sector. And really, my question is how do we actually ensure staff there is a degree of sort of stability within these organisations, and actually staff don't just go from care company to care company, home to home, and actually get some consistency in the level of care and business. So that's my first question.
Okay. Yeah, another tricky one in terms of that. You're absolutely right. I probably should have covered that in the presentation. To see the high turnover of staff within will amount, will actually equate to that high numbers of vacancies. There's probably a number of ways of actually looking at how we reduce or address that turnover, and in particular, one would be training of staff and investment in training and staff, because obviously that then, if we're investing in that training and staff, the the policy around that would be actually that staff would be more willing to then stay within the business that they're in. You generate that stickiness, but I guess there's a number of different ways to try and address that, and it isn't an easy one, I'm afraid. There isn't a quick solution to it.
Yeah, I can understand why you'd want to sort of train up staff, but I think there is also sort of a hierarchical system in care where you actually, you can only have a certain number of managers, you can only have a certain number of carers, you can only have a certain number of senior carers. It's a very hierarchical system, like a pyramid. So that's probably my concern about actually, yes, we want people to skill up, but the jobs have to be there in the sector. Can I just ask about the Kickstart scheme as well? Obviously, it was only a 6 month program. Was there job retention after the end of the scheme?
Okay, it's the 6 months is the 6 month placement of the young people. So actually, the scheme runs till the end of 2021. Although we've got the placements created, it's still early days in terms of the numbers of young people that go into those placements. So we haven't seen any young people go through the full process yet. But we are at the moment looking at the additional support that both employers and young people will get as part of that scheme. And a key part of that is actually looking at what that progression routes will be once they finish that 6 month placement. What we don't want to see is huge numbers of young people going through a 6 month placement and then obviously dropping off at the end of that and becoming unemployed again. What we'd ideally like is those employers who are taking on those young people to then be able to offer them full-time permanent opportunities if they can. But if they can't, how do we incorporate some careers advice and guidance for those young people and those employers to then make sure that actually they're accessing other opportunities. And we should be aiming for as many of those young people as possible to then move on to another opportunity after that. And that can include apprenticeships as well. So going through the Kickstart scheme would be a really good way of accessing an apprenticeship opportunity at the end of that.
Because I think there's a real danger that actually these I shouldn't call them children, these young people just become cheap labour for certain companies for 6 months if the scheme is paying their wages and it's paying income tax and what have you, that actually they use these people for 6 months and then there is no job retention at the end, there is no skilling up, it's just cheap labour. And my final point is about the data that was obviously shown in the presentation. I know it's not the officer's fault, but a lot of it is out of date. I think it's until we find out sort of the impact on jobs and employment that the pandemic has caused, it's quite difficult to actually get a full picture. So I think we need to take some of the data with a pinch of salt, because it was comparing 2019 to 2020. I can't imagine the data is totally accurate about actually what the reality is. So that's just my final point. So thank you, Chair, for letting me ramble on.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to come back on any of the final points that Matthew was making?
Yeah, absolutely. Except on the data, we try to use the most recent data that we can to obviously then represent the current situation. And just on the Kickstart, on the quality of placements, that is part of the process where business, if they're submitting expressions of interest around Kickstart placements, there is a quality check within that to make sure that it isn't displacement of current jobs and people in those jobs, that they are new opportunities for young people. And there was also a number of additional quality checks that both the Combined Authority will make and the Department for Work and Pensions when they're looking at those vacancies as well. So there's a layering of the quality around that. And obviously we'll be having discussions face-to-face with employers around actually the placements that they're going to offer, what the progression routes will be for that, what the job roles entail as well. So a number of ways to try and address the quality aspect of it.
That's great. It's good to hear that. And yes, and it's Matthew, I think you're absolutely right. We will need to follow this over the next few months, several months, year, 2 years maybe, to look at how the data changes, and hopefully it won't continue to worsen. It will get better, but we need to keep an eye on it. So yes, thank you for that. Joe Kerwin, you had your hand raised and then it went down. I don't know whether you intended to take it down.
Matthew asked my question, but actually now you've called me.
That's all right. I just
there was something else actually. The council starting its own trial of delivering home care in the northwest of the borough, and obviously we've talked a lot about the support for care staff and the esteem and pay. And I was wondering, what are we going to do to lead by example? You know, what are we going to do differently that we then potentially export or share with the other employers and care providers?
Okay, not an area that I'm particularly close to, so it's probably a question that I would need to take away and speak to other officers about and respond to that point. Obviously, we've been very much focused on delivering the new sort of training aspect of that, but obviously there has been engagement with the council as an employer. But I'll certainly take that away and have a discussion and come back to you with an answer on that one.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Joan Walker? You have your hand raised?
I did. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mark, for the presentation today. Two questions. One in regards to the social care vacancies, but also I'd like to ask some questions about the skills for jobs slide you gave, about the guarantee for flexible lifetime skills. But back to social care vacancies, Councillor Kerwin also mentioned in regards to the pilot that's taking place at the moment in the northwest, and there was also a mention about the Gateshead hub for NHS staff, and I wondered if there is going to be a mix of social care and NHS work being developed in the northwest. I appreciate, as you said earlier to Councillor Kerwin's question, you're not an expert in this, but I wondered if there is going to be, because obviously the COVID-19 pandemic showed a lot of people who have long COVID symptoms that would need a lot of care in the future, and I just wondered if how good the pilot is developing at the moment.
Okay. Again, yeah, another question I would need to take away and speak to the officers involved in that pilot to get some more information on that. Again, the NHS COVID test hubs facility over in Gateshead was really around the recruitment and training, just to try and make sure as many of residents as possible had access to those opportunities. So that was our sort of key role in that, where we provided some pre-employment training, but also then helped with applications, submitting CVs, that type of activity to access those opportunities.
Thank you, Chair. And my other question was in regards to the skills for jobs. I do understand from you said from the presentation that won't start until 2025. And I just wondered if you could give some further details of what will this include and why we're waiting until, another 4 years for this.
Yeah, I can take away and get a bit more information on the lifelong loan facilities that will start 2025, and I can check the reasons for that, why it is taking so long. The lifetime skills guarantee will be coming in earlier, so there is then an entitlement to a first level 3 qualification, which will come in much sooner. So there are several aspects to that, but I can certainly provide some more information on the different aspects of that proposal within the skills white paper.
Thank you, Mark. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Karen Lee, you've got your hand up. Karen?
Oh, hello there. Right, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Good stuff, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, I had a prior meeting, so I was a little late, so I just joining. But thank you very much for that. It was very
Could you put your camera on as well, please, Karen?
Yeah, sure.
Are you struggling? In which case, if you can't, just ask your question. Karen, can you hear me? Because we can't hear you. I think what we're going to do is, does anybody else want to make any comments or ask any questions? Joan, your hand is down. Karen, if nobody else wants to ask any questions, I would say thank you very much, Mark. I have to say I went on, and I agree with all the comments, the positive comments that committee members have made about the presentation, the work that's going on. I had a quick look today at our Skills North Tyneside website and the North Tyneside employment, NTE employment Twitter site, and I thought they were really high standard. They were excellent, and I'm not surprised if we're putting communications out like that. You're getting so many attendees at things like the Apprenticeship Week and everything else that you're doing. It's really, really high quality. So well done to everybody who's involved in that. So Karen's hand has gone. I don't know whether Karen has gone, but can we move on to Sean Collier for your presentation now, please?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Okay. Can you see the slides okay?
Yes. See you and well, see the slides and hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been asked to look at some of the data, to look at where we are with the economy, and some of you may have seen some of these slides already. I know they're available in other formats as well. So it was just to give a brief overview. As kind of mentioned earlier on, I think some of the data we've got is a little bit out of date, and a lot of the data that we do use on a normal day-to-day basis is based on the annual data. So a lot of the Office for National Statistics information is just produced once a year, so it's not very good when you try to track the economy of the borough and something like this, but we'll just take you through some of the information we've got. We thought this might be something that would be useful for every meeting, so we can prepare some of the kind of data documents every time. It might not be worthy of a presentation every time, but just so you've got that background information. Just as a bit of an introduction, really, to have a look at the 7-day infection rates. This is going back the last year, but you'll be able to see, with regards to the important part, really, is since the turn of the year. So it's been a steady decline in the infection rates there going forward. It's obviously positive news. Some of the key information: the 7-day infection rate 148.1, vaccinations, first doses 45,821 so far, second doses just over 2,000, and 308 new cases in the last 7 days. So generally positive news, which has not been good recently, but since January it's looking much better. Yeah, so just looking at universal credit claimants, Mark touched on some of these slides as well, so I'll try to cover them quite briefly. So the total residents in universal credit is 19,359, which is a 76% increase since the pandemic started. You can see the general increase there since June 19 over the last year. So there's 8,328 universal claimants searching or preparing for work, and just over 7,000 of those claimants in work. Also, the furlough schemes Mark mentioned, this is just a bit of a comparison with the local authorities. So the amount of people on furlough schemes in North Tyneside is 10,300, and it's fairly standard. Obviously, those with a larger number are generally the larger authorities, and smaller authorities, it's quite a standard rate across the borough, the different boroughs. The town centre vacancy rates, this is just Whitley, North Shields and Wallsend. There is some slightly more up-to-date data from this is from October. We also did it in December, just before the lockdown as well, which saw a slight change. So North Shields, the vacancy rate stayed at 19. Wallsend, it's gone down slightly to 13, and Whitley Bay has gone up slightly to 13. There's always some anomalies and some slight differences within the figures as we go through the years, but in general it's been surprisingly flat and surprisingly very little change in the town centres. But obviously we're expecting that to change quite a bit as we move out and the furlough schemes stop, and the businesses, we're not expecting some of these businesses to come back in the town centres as well, so the vacancy rates are anticipated to go up quite rapidly once the furlough schemes come out of it. With regards to the ONS data, so because some of that's not available for a little while now, ONS do a business impact survey. So there's some information, the next couple of slides, we've got some information on the business impact survey. Effectively, 9 out of 10 businesses in the North East are currently trading. And the majority of those that are not trading are on the obvious ones. You thought the accommodation, food, entertainment, retail, are where they're not currently trading for obvious reasons. The second question from that is in relation to the how the COVID-19 has affected your turnover. So 2 out of 5 businesses' turnover has decreased, and just under 2 out of 5 has not been affected at all. So again, you can see there kind of 40%, just under 40% have had no effect, but there's quite a few decreased there, and 7% has actually increased turnover as well with those figures. The final one on this one is one we need to take with a pinch of salt, because this states that the number of new businesses in the last year have increased by 7.5%. As we also run the Business Factory, a startup program in North Tyneside, then we know the numbers for that are way down than what they've been previously. This data is from BankSearch, which actually records the number of new business bank accounts that have been created in North Tyneside. So that has shown an increase. But I suspect that data has come from, I think, people applying for loans, applying for grants and other things, and needed to get their act together a bit and get a business bank account sorted or change the business bank accounts. So there's certainly been more business bank accounts open, but there hasn't been more businesses started, so that one's worth with a pinch of salt. Okay, so if I can just get rid of that. Okay, so that was just a whistle-stop tour. Basically, we thought we'd provide that information at every meeting. So if there's any comments on things you thought were useful or not useful, happy to take it forward. I'll also share the slides with Michael so you can circulate them with the notes of the meeting as well. And that's all it was, really just a quick update on the data that we have available and how we might use it.
Thank you very much, Sean. Has anybody got any questions or comments that they want to make? I mean, I found it that. Oh, excuse me, I've just switched my phone off. Making awful noises. I thought it was very useful, and I think it would be very helpful if that sort of information could come back to future meetings. I think we need to be kept involved with what is happening. It would be very helpful. I don't know if anybody else. Matthew, you got a hand up, and then John.
Yes, it was just to say that actually the data was actually really useful, because it sort of it gives a full picture of actually, what's been happening. So actually, if it was circulated to members on a regular basis as opposed to coming back to meetings, that might be better and more informative.
Yeah, I can take that back to Pam Colby and the research team as well, because she produces on a weekly basis. So and ask her to make sure it's available for councillors in some form. I think it's shared at some stage, but I'm not sure what frequency that is at the moment. But if I speak to her and report back.
I think it would be helpful. I mean, I think that's fine, Matthew. It would be helpful to have it more frequently, but I think it probably needs to come back so that we are able to have a discussion about things.
Oh yes, of course. But
contribute to it.
But in between meetings, it would be useful.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks.
John Harrison, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Jim. I'm having a bit of problem with the camera, but
That's all right.
Wait a minute. I think I've got problems with the camera, but never mind. And I've also got problems with somebody trying to contact me.
It's not me. I had problems with my phone a minute ago.
No, it's somebody else. Chair, whilst that's interesting, which we're looking at North Tyneside, I was just wondering, do we have a further look at, say, for example, the economy, the impact that it's more than about COVID at the moment, isn't it? We've got to look at the impact of Brexit. So whilst we might be looking at the local impact, which is important, we fit into a wider area, which is the economy of this country, and certainly the impact that COVID, the pandemic's had on the world economy. And if we take on board, we understand that, we say to ourselves, where are the skills for the future, and what do we need to be training our young people to? And do we clearly have a plan for us to go forward? We've looked at, for example, talking about the green economy and the green industrial jobs, but what really are those? We've looked at, we just mentioned there before, the social care for some of our older people and the economy that's generated or is around that, looking after those people. And it is important for us to do that. But I was just wondering, have we got this longer term view? And is it something that we should be asking? Because to help ourselves and to shape ourselves now with some of the statistics which are out of date, and probably the thinking is slightly out of date, because given the impact that we've seen in the world, and I've said, and certainly this country, we need to have that. And I don't necessarily say the government has that, but where's our longer term views? And are we looking at that? And I would like to see some statistics on that, because what I do know is that business investment has actually reduced, and I can understand why, because people are not sure where we are going, so businesses are not necessarily going to invest in their business. I also know the impact that we've had in certain areas, whether it's in the accommodation or the food sector, because of the lockdown. And I also know in the communication areas. But if we're going to move forward, we need to be actually looking at our economy. So what will our economy in North Tyneside be, fitting into the world? And what will also the employment, and where will we be training? So we train people for skills for lives, and those skills have got to be flexible to allow us to move from one job and maybe training into another job and forward. So I'm really not getting necessarily a flavour of this, and I know we haven't asked for that probably, but what I'm suggesting is that if we're looking at COVID and the impact of COVID, we've also got to look at certainly the impact of what Brexit means to us. We've actually got to look at those economic factors. What are we shaping ourselves up to actually meet that? Because we might be only 200,000 people, we might fit into a we're very small, but fit into a larger world. But if we can't understand and we can't get those things right, then I do think that we'll probably fail in some of those areas. And I'm not saying people aren't doing that, but I would like to see that some of those statistics come to us. Yes, our local economy, where do we fit in our regional economy, where do we fit nationally, and where do we actually fit into the world as we move forward? Because if we don't understand those things, then I do think that we'll fail in North Tyneside.
Thank you, John. I'm going to bring John Sparks in, because you put your hand up, John. I'm guessing that you wish to respond to John Harrison.
Yeah.
I'll bring you later, Matt.
Thanks, John. And I think it's a point really well made. And I think it's not so much being part of North Tyneside. It's part of being part of the North East Combined Authority, part of being part of the North East. And I think if you look in terms of some of the structures we have around the local economic partnership being the kind of driver in terms of some of the economic policies we're developing or have been developed through things like the local industrial strategy, which is emerging in the strategic economic plan. But I think it's about, when we go back to first principles about what we're trying to do here, it's about more and better jobs, isn't it? It's about getting people into high quality jobs, which will, provide a high quality of life and prosperity. And, I'd just get back to that point. I don't think we're paddling our own canoe on this, and I'm sure Henry will jump in very quickly on the back of this as well. But it's about, in my mind, it's about having a really structured regional approach to the economy to make sure we're complementing each other, not competing for investment, and actually able to have a strong voice to sort of engage with central government as well, because there will be funding coming forward replacing things like the European structural funds. There'll be the shared prosperity funds coming forward and various other things as well. So I'd like to try and give you the confidence, John, that we are working with colleagues regionally and nationally to try and fettle this and to make sure we're well placed to meet the challenges ahead.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And
can I just follow on just quickly on that? I understand all that, John, and but our new way forward, and it's coming out now, it's quite clearly coming out. There's reports that's telling us that what we are learning from this, coming through the COVID, is the virtual working. So, such as likes of meetings like this, we're seeing that for our future. We'll also be probably more home working, and we're also seeing those green industry and the green types of jobs. We need to be clear on ourselves. What do we mean by those green industry and green types of jobs, and how are we gearing our young people up to have those skills, and certainly some of our unemployment, because our unemployment is rising. And if we're looking at home working and virtual working, have we got the skills, and are we investing in the areas to actually give people those skills and the ability? So do we have, if you want, those broadband facilities for people to be able to do that? And certainly, do people actually have the equipment to be able to do that, and can they afford to do that?
If I can just quickly respond on that, I think, John, the issue around home working is a bit of a game changer on various levels. I think, first of all, it's probably a bit of a game changer for the regional office market potentially. I don't think there's going to be a situation where companies don't want offices anymore. I just don't think they'll want them for all the staff all of the time. I think it'll be more drop-down space and things like that. So there'll be a bit of a restructure there. In terms of housing, I think it's quite worrying the amount of people you see on Teams meetings sitting on the edge of the spare bed, if I'm being honest, and that's not sustainable in the long term. It's interesting that I think there'll be a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of the house builders going forward. I mean, obviously there's the existing stock, which just is the existing stock, and there's retrofitting and things like that. But I think certainly on new housing coming forward, the more enlightened house builders will start thinking about workspace as opposed to bedrooms, making sure you've got the broadband coverage coming in from the outset, and actually making sure the infrastructure, in terms of cabling and things like that, is sorted as a kind of prerequisite for development, not as an afterthought. So I think there will be. I think the markets will naturally start to find the level sort of in the sort of post-COVID environment.